We've all come together this afternoon to talk about and to share some stories, I hope, about the Maxwell Twins and their dad. It's a fascinating story because the more we delve into it, the more we discover Black history in Inverness County. So far as I am aware, and we've talked about this in other circumstances, the first person to come into Inverness County as a permanent settler was a black woman who came from South Carolina. And she came here before 1800 to be the children's nurse and maid for a young woman from South Carolina that she had helped to bring up. And it's only just very recently that we've been able to discover what her name is. So, and I've always known where her grave was. Can you imagine what it was like for a young woman from South Carolina coming to Nova Scotia through St. Augustine, Florida, and eventually through Halifax and then Guysborough, coming to Nova Scotia and being here for the first winter? What a surprise it was to her, I think, as it was to many people from the South. She's buried in a beautiful corner of a pioneer cemetery in Hillsborough, Inverness County. And I treasure the thought of her a lot. But I've always known a little bit about there being in Waikagama also a family of blacks who were entirely integrated into the community. So much so that almost nobody ever talked about them, except that I heard about Charlotte going to school with some members of my own family and being taught by a great-granduncle of some of us. And the Maxwell Twins, or the Maxwell family indeed, with their Gaelic-speaking facilities and the tradition, has surfaced now and again in the literature of stories about Inverness County, going all the way back perhaps to the time of Clara Dennis and her Cape Breton over, where she came to Marble Mountain and talked about the people whom she met there. And the story is a fascinating one, and I'm hoping that there are people here who can add to the story, because I'm not a great expert on these people. Want to know more and want all of you to have a chance to meet. It is important then that we recognize there will be tea in the adjacent room for people to share some conversations, and those people who wish to tour the various buildings in the hill will make that available as well. We hope that all of you will sign your name so that we'll know who you are and that you are here. George Maxwell I, as opposed to George II and George III, according to his tombstone and also according to tradition, was born in Halifax. The tombstone in the Malagawak Cemetery I find particularly moving because he's there surrounded by the final resting place of a great many other Gaelic-speaking people from the island of Call and from Slate, from a number of Scottish communities overseas. As we understand the story, an O'Hanley who lived in Judic, who was not Irish, at least recently, but was the descendant of an O'Hanley family from the island of South Uist in Scotland, gathered up this little boy, George I, and brought him back to Judic, where he was raised in a Gaelic-speaking home. It's such a wonderful, intricate web of things when you begin to search it out, because the O'Hanleys are the ancestors of Dan R. MacDonald, the great composer, and of John Allen Cameron, the great performer performer in our own time. Isn't it interesting that in that O'Hanley home there was raised this little black boy and who married a woman whose last name we do not know, at least I do not know. Her first name was Mary Jane. She may perhaps have come from Guysborough County. I've heard that suggested, but I've never seen it in print. We know that she died in June of 1876 when she was 62, and her grave is also, of course, at the Malagawatch Cemetery. Their family suffered a great deal from that scourge of rural Nova Scotia, of rural Cape Breton, from consumption and from tuberculosis. A number of their children died fairly young. As I understand the list, and there may have been others, there was an older Jessie, a Jessie number 1, and a Matilda, sometimes known as Tilly, Mary Ann, Peter, and then the twins, George and John, who were born in 1864 on the 18th of June. At least that's what they said on the 1901 census, that their birth date was the 18th of June. Jessie and the first Jessie and Matilda and Mary Ann died when they were fairly young, and their death records state that they died of consumption, and they were in the Marble Mountain, River Dennis area. I suspect there were probably others, and I haven't found any other names, although I do find some Maxwells listed in the Halifax census and also in death records in Halifax, but I'm not sure whether they are the same family. We do know about George and John that one was quite outgoing and one was much more quiet. We do know that George married Katie Ann Fowler, who claims also to have been brought up, at least for a portion of her childhood, and maybe born in the community of Judic, which is the same community that the first Maxwell was brought up as a child. Now, I have not been able to find anybody in Judic who can confirm that, but there may yet be some evidence somewhere that we will discover that will show that. The Fowlers lived for a considerable period of time in Valley Mills, on the road between Crowdis Bridge and River Dennis, not too far from where there is the remains of an old mill and a waterfall, somewhere around where the Blues lived, I think. And that family is known to us a bit. Joseph Fowler and Annie Catherine, or she's sometimes known as Catherine Annie. She seems to like to turn her name around. She, interestingly enough, in the 1901 census, is still living as a widow in Waikagama, very close to where the telephone building in Waikagama currently is. And that might be where you saw some of those people, if you remember. Somewhere just on the way to Stewartdale, yeah. She claimed, although I don't know any way to show how that would be true, that she understood Gaelic on the 1901 census. The 1901 census in Nova Scotia is particularly interesting because it is the first census in which people are requested to identify what languages other than English they understand or use. Now again, we don't know how honest people were about what they said in the census records. Men were known often to lie and make their ages much younger than they actually were. Some of us in this room had a great-granduncle who was a census taker who made himself 20 years younger whenever he took the census, but when it came time for it to be 80 and prestigious, he got instantly to be 25 years older. But he was a McDonald. In the family of the Fowlers in River Dennis, there were a number of children, and one of those, Katie, was married to George Maxwell. The other one, Jessie, was married to Thomas Graham of Waikagama. And they're particularly interesting to me because Graham came into Waikagama on a vessel, identifies himself as a sailor, and in one other place he identifies himself as a cook on a vessel. For those of you who know Waikagama, or have traveled the road between Waikagama and Mabo, or Waikagama and Lake Ainslie, he lived almost exactly where the little telephone building is today on the road to Lake Ainslie. There's still a small apple tree there which marks the site of Thomas Graham's house. He had one daughter, Charlotte, and it is of her that I first, through memories of her, that I first heard about Thomas Graham. Thomas Graham states that he was born in Port Royal, Virginia. On his marriage certificate to Jessie Fowler, he also states who his parents in Virginia were. So I suspect that that family, at any rate, because of the excellent records that there are in Virginia, might be able to be traced back some generation, perhaps even to the 1600s. These families are intertwined. They come to Waikagama, and both the Maxwells and the Grahams at a slightly earlier time seem to have been completely integrated into the community. And that's not just because they were Presbyterian, or at least they came to be Presbyterian, but they likely have had something to do with the fact that they were living in a community that was primarily Presbyterian, and they were members of that church, and I understand held some office at one time or another in that church, and went to the public school where there seemed to be no differentiation in a community that was fairly rigid at times in its appreciation of people of other ethnic or indeed of other religious backgrounds. Some of you may know the story about the loss in Waikagama when Alexander Graham Bell first came to Breton. Graham Bell was looking for a place to live and came into Waikagama on a sailing vessel, or maybe on one of the coastal, or one of the steamboats, and got off at the wharf and said that he would like to talk to somebody about buying some land in Waikagama, and he was told that he had to go see a certain Mr. McLean. Well, who was Mr. McLean? Mr. McLean was the Presbyterian minister in Waikagama, who seems to dabble also in real estate. Anyhow, Alexander Graham Bell went to see McLean, and McLean said, well, I've heard of your work, Mr. Bell. I'm very interested that you've come to Waikagama. What can we do for you? So Mr. Bell is alleged to have said to Mr. McLean, I've come here because I want to buy some land. This reminds me so much of Scotland, such a beautiful place. I'd like to have a summer home here for my family. So Mr. McLean, the Presbyterian minister, is alleged to have said, well, now that's interesting, Mr. Bell. May I ask what your religion is? Well, said Mr. Bell, I must tell you, Mr. McLean, I'm an atheist. In that event, said Mr. McLean, why don't you try Bedeck? There's no land. Not quite sure what that says about Bedeck, but I know what it says about McLean, I guess. The stories then about the Maxwells are many. We've tried to track down through some people who are in this room the tradition that there were some Gaelic songs composed by the Maxwells. And I don't think thus far we've found one. Has anybody found a Gaelic song composed? Well, that's the homework assignment, everybody. When you leave today, we need to keep searching. But we also have the benefit today of a tape, which was recorded some time ago, which perhaps we could play now. if you would.
Gary?
That's right. Because the black line didn't materialize. I think Maxwell was earnest in his, in his ideas. But the trouble was to get these ideas to work, to get people to help them, to put these ideas in effort. No matter well, we had the help of good too. Not the honest help.
The people I meet and the stories I hear.
I was up at a fellow's place here, Fraser was his name, and we were having a drink or two, and I was singing this song, and he said to me, he said, that's not the way my grandfather used to sing it. Just wait till I think of her. Oh yes, it was about
George Maxwell, one of the Marble Mountain Maxwells, retired steelworker, black, and a good Gaelic speaker, too.
If your parents talk Gaelic in the house all the time, you want to, and you're a little boy around and you're very inquisitive, and it don't take you very long to catch on to what they're saying if you hear them talking Gaelic all the time. My parents never talked English to one another in the house.
He thinks of himself as black, but he looks like a Scotsman with a good tan, and fine not. Three of his grandparents were Breton, Gaelic speakers too, and the fourth...
My grandfather came to Halifax on a vessel, a Northman, from some slavery in Africa, I guess, because he was a slave kid. And this one, he was in Halifax for a load of potatoes with a horse and cart. And one of the sailors asked Lord Henley, did he want this little boy? And he said, yes, he'd take him. And he took him to his home and raised him up in Judith. And he learned to be a violin player. And his occupation was hewing frames for houses and barns. They didn't have too many saws in them days. They used to do it with a broadaxe.
And that little African boy grew up and married a MacDonald, and that was that. I say to Mr. Maxwell, has he ever heard of Rudyard Kipling's story, Captains Courageous, about fishing on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, and the two black seamen, Gaelic speaking in the story? I had the words out of my mouth.
That was my father and my uncle. They used to go to the Grand Banks fishing, and in them days they used to hire on in Gloucester, Massachusetts.
How's that for oral history? I feel as though I've struck a vein of pure literary gold. Everyone has stories. They talk about the early days, about when they arrived from the West Indies.
In 1960, and we had a rough time of it. We were scared to go on the streets at night and beat you up. There were some, youngsters around, the rowdies, as they call them. The rowdies hanging around the streets, and if you couldn't walk alone, you had to walk in a bunch. After a while, all those things died out. 1914 to 1918, see. And It appears that a lot of the fellows, the rowdies went overseas. And after that, I never heard any more about it. Things got better. Jobs were plenty for them those days. War time, you know. The labor jobs, and there wasn't mechanical jobs. There weren't many who got such jobs, but they got fairly decent jobs, you know.
Well, I used to work in a blacksmith shop before I ever went away and went Highland. Well, getting very small money. About 90 cents a day. When you clinch the shoes on 4 or 5 horses, you're back and you're pretty sure.
There's one thing about it. I started it on one job and I ended on the same job. Well, I was a stationary fireman, making steam in the boilers, on the boilers. You had to go to work in the morning at 7 o'clock. You never got home before 6, working on the day shift. It was pretty hard in those days. Pretty hard work for small pay. $1.40 a day. 14 cents an hour. But that's the truth. 14 cents an hour is $1.40. And if you happen to put an extra hour, and you get $1.54 for that day. 14 cents an hour. Although the pay was small, the pay it was lived along. I remember we could buy 75 pounds of potatoes for $1, a bag of potatoes. I used to boil meat 10 cents a pound. Sardines were 5 cents a can.
Well, it was a long, hot summer, and nobody had any money, and the steel workers were on strike the whole summer. And the union, I suppose, gave the workers a slip of paper, not money, that said to take this to the grocery store, and they give you, I think it's either $7 or $8 worth of groceries. And September came, and school started, and the strike was still on, and it was $9 to help buy school supplies. And sometime shortly after that, the strike finally ended. And I had 2 brothers to go back to Acadia University who had hoped to work at Glasgow for the summer to get some money for college. However, they went back. All I can remember is get loan from the credit union, and they went back, and that was it. But growing up, my mother was very thrifty. She made all our clothes. We didn't have anything that came out of the store. She was quite a seamstress.
For a while, there was only about 4 black families on our street. And so we played with all the white kids, too. And we used to set up little concerts in the backyard. And then in the church, we would have a concert downstairs. This would be with the white kids, too, even though they weren't members of our church, because my father's church is the African Orthodox Church, so they weren't members of the church. But we'd have little concerts down in the basement of the church. And all the parents would come just to see what we were doing, And so this it was, growing up was fun. I always did well in school. My sister always did well in school, and we obeyed our parents. We weren't allowed to obey much because he was a minister, so, the minister thought it was not supposed to go here and there. That was sort of, reminds that a bit, but we had to listen, and that was it. But, I had a good life growing up. I had no complaints whatsoever. Mr. Neville Gibson, retired steelworker, community.
Well, the voice sounds familiar to some people here, doesn't it? Yes. And it was lovely to see the smiles come on your faces, and to see you joining hands and tears in your eyes. It was very touching. What a treasure to have that. We have that tape then through the kindness of the University College of Cape Breton, through the Breton archives, and we're very grateful to them.